Hey, so what most of you have probably found out by now, or figured out by now, is that Enhancement is way worse off than it was before patch 5.1, which is really disappointing. Extremely disappointing, because it was looking like, based on what the patch notes were, was that our most problematic classes were getting nerfed, and I wasn't sure if the hits coming towards us were going to be that severe, but they turned out to be incredibly bad. Actually, I didn't know the hybrid healing nerf was going to go through until the end. But that plus the totem change plus the increase of damage just killed us. I mean, is killing us right now. We have no chance at all in most areas of PvP. It's really baffling though. But what I'm hoping this does now, our current state, is make it so clear to the developers that they don't have a chance to ignore how bad of a state Enhancement is in. Because, well, for as long as I've played Enhancement, since Season 8 and Wrath, we've always teetered on the brink of viability or balance. And it was mostly because we've never had good passive or active survivability or damage cooldowns. So in Mist, we got our damage cooldowns in Ascendance, and for a little while it looked like our survivability issues were going to be solved as well. And that was at level 85 when the release of patch 5.0.4, the pre-expansion patch. And all the clips I'm showing right now are from older recordings back then. And I've got to say that short month before this expansion was the most fun I have ever had playing on my Enhancement Shaman, because I actually had survivability and could be self-sufficient. Like, I could 1v2 or 1v3 bad and undergeared players because my target uptime, my maneuvering, CC, cooldown use, and heals especially allowed me to persist under pressure from one or more attacking opponent without helplessly just dying to any kind of burst cooldowns used. And with heals that were actually effective, like, I could recover from some big damage that I took and keep fighting on for as long as someone, with my skill level and, playing the game for as long as I have, on and off since beta, should be expected to be able to do, if the game was balanced and if Enhance was, good, a good spec, solid spec, a viable spec. So the questions now, though, are what do Enhancement Shamans want and what do Enhancement Shamans need? Because I think it's undoubtable that right now we need something. There were 3 changes in 5.1 that hit us really hard. The first was the totems and now spells can be silenced and locked out, which most people think is really ridiculous. I wasn't sure if it would hurt us that much, but it really does hurt us a lot. Enhancement a lot. I mean, it makes it so easily locked down when they get a fear on our healer. We just get silenced and it locks out like 90% of our abilities. Almost 90% of abilities, probably 85% of our abilities are locked out, including our totems, so we can't break tremors or we can't ground traps or anything with just a silencing shot or a priest silence. And it's like we're caster. It's like we're caster because our auto attacks don't do that much damage, and if we're not in melee range, just Storm Strike, or if it's on cooldown. The 4 or 5 abilities that we do have available when we're silenced are cooldown based abilities. So more often than not, we just can't do anything. But despite the huge outcry against the change, there was a forum post against it that got up to 2,000 replies, I think. But it still went through. But then there's the hybrid healing nerf. And even though Enhancement's heals were pretty pathetic to begin with, maybe the least effective, maybe probably the worst out of all the hybrids, it hit Enhancement really hard, maybe even the most, because our survivability was already trash, and we were already hanging on by a thread trying to squeeze out as much HP as we could. So now our heals are nothing. I mean, it turned out to be, a 30% nerf to our heals, or, not including the added PvP power on the weapons. Well, the biggest point that I want to make, though, with these old PvP clips is that before our heals were first nerfed by 15% across the board in PvP, and now the hybrid heal nerfs. Before these 2 nerfs, it seemed like we could handle opponents really well, and even multiple ones at the same time. Whenever we were bursted, we weren't just dead in the water, but actually had a chance to push ourselves into the opponent's face, generate our Maelstrom procs and pick ourselves back up, or use totems that were actually effective. That actually did something. Not the pathetic 5k a tick healing stream totem that we have now, or even the healing tide totem, which only does 11.5k now for me. Just nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. It's such a joke. But playing at level 85 to the mist patch, it was freaking fun as hell and exhilarating because we can actually maintain ourselves. Enhanced had never had such good survivability, and especially in the hands of someone who knew what to do with it. And if you look at some of my other old videos, like my dueling videos, it was perfectly balanced then, at least for Enhanced. It was perfectly balanced. The mage fights, warrior fights were intriguing. They were back and forth. They were 50-50 for the most part. Even against mages, the better mages, they could still beat us, but it wasn't just a guaranteed kill for them like it is now in 1v1 duels that I've been doing, even before 5.1. I've been dueling recently this week, and we can't beat anything. I mean, nothing. It's ridiculous, and it's pissing me off just thinking about it. I can't even think about it. I see that what we could have been, and then now it's just so disappointing. But all these clips, they were of course at 85. In most classes were still missing some of their damage attacks they would have gotten on their way to level 90. So our survivability, if both those healing nerfs didn't go through, wouldn't be as good as what it is in these videos. But it would be solid. It'd be pretty damn good. Like I would have been happy for it. It was perfectly. I think it was perfect. The perfect amount. That would be reasonable for Enhancement Shaman, considering our total lack of defensive capability, or of defensive cooldowns and passive reduction. And it all just disappeared. It all just disappeared when they nerfed all healing by 15%. I mean, just that one change hurt a lot, hit us really hard. So, in my opinion, though, for both, in order for Enhanced and Elemental to both be balanced, they have to be the best, or one of the best 1v1 specs in the game. Because for me, it's kind of a litmus test to see if we'd be balanced in group fights. And my reasoning for that is because, for one, our defenses against multiple opponents are near non-existent. And that also includes offensive stuff like AoE CCs and damage. Most classes, and I went over this in a video earlier. I mean, I predicted all of this crap in some of the first videos that I made, because Enhanced just has 2. Like Enhanced and Elemental both just have up to 2 abilities that are effective against more than one opponent. So yeah, we have to be the best in 1v1 fights. So the fact that we hadn't been all that great in 1v1, mages, hunters, warriors, ferals, and shadow priests or rets who knew what they were doing were particularly impossible or near impossible. It was just an indication of how well we do in groups. And we weren't doing too bad. We couldn't handle straight up fights like most classes could. We always had to play scared that we could get bursted at any second, or if our healer was CC for a bit too long, we would just die because we had nothing to fall back on ourselves. So then we had to start stacking full resilience. We were the only spec, I think, that really had to stack full resilience already before 5.1. And we were barely hanging on even with that. And with that 15% nerf to the healing, we were far cry from being self-sufficient in battlegrounds or even arenas. Anyone who plays Enhancement now can see from these clips that we're nowhere near what it was looking like, what could have been our level of capabilities. That first blanket 50% nerf destroyed it for us, because even though it was just 15% reduction heals overall, it hit us hard because our sustainability totally depends on our heals. Then the icing on the cake, the third 5.1 change that really screwed Enhancement was the increased power on the weapons, because we have probably the worst passive and active damage reduction in the game, and we simply just are getting annihilated now by the damage increase. And you can watch a recording of some of my arena games on my Twitch stream this last few weeks. I'll put the link in the description. In a lot of cases, in most cases, the damage you take is just unbearable. It's impossible to live through. I can go from 100 to 0 with both my Shamanistic Rage and Astral Shift up against enemy cooldowns while my healer is in a single CC. Just one CC against 2 cooldowns popped, with me with 70% damage reduction, and I die. I mean, our cooldowns are supposed to be there to help us live through CCs on our healer, but they just don't do anything, particularly against this feral BM team that I played against. But like I said in the video before this one, some classes have been able to compensate for the damage by simply stacking more resilience, hence being fine or even in some cases better than they were before. Shadow Ferals, Shadow Priests, Warriors, Demo Locks, and Mages were already strong and are now even stronger, I think, both in their damage and survivability, because they all of a sudden realized how good resilience is. The difference between a target with 0 resilience and a target with 4 resilience gems is like 20% damage reduction. And the biggest general reason why the overpowered damage classes were overpowered wasn't necessarily just because of their damage, but because of their survivability, which afforded them the luxury of stacking full PvP power gems and the ability to play less cautiously, more offensively, because they knew they had the survivability to fall back on in case they found themselves in any trouble. So once everyone realized that they can simply stack resilience to mitigate some of the new craziness of the bursts that's flying around at the moment after 5.1, it won't be so bad for most players. But the problem for enhanced shamans and even ret paladins and elemental shamans is that we already had to stack resilience and had already run out of room to compensate for any kind of boost to damage. So we're totally screwed out. There's nothing more that I could do to in terms of preparation to help me survive longer. But I think this can turn out to be a good thing now, because it's totally undeniable that enhancement survivability and general capability is utter trash now in every area of PvP, from 1 vs 1 to rated battlegrounds. We don't have a single PvP aspect that we're particularly good at. So what about the mechanics of enhancement? What do we bring to the table? Really what enhancement is good at is only 3 things: Purge, Tremor Totem, and Ascendance. In every other area you can think of, like sustained damage, survivability, mobility, peels, etc., were totally lackluster. But these things, the Purge, Tremor Totem, and Ascendance, are the only things that seem to justify our terrible defenses. And Blizzard apparently thought totems were too strong for all shamans when they made them silenceable. And Tremor Totem seems to be the main culprit concerning all specs. So I guess they think having an AoE fear breaker is too strong. And that's pretty evident though with how Totemic Restoration talent was just inexplicably bugged out and disabled for Tremor Totem pickups. It wasn't reducing the cooldown on Tremor Totem in arenas all the time. So what it seems like to me is that the poor as hell defenses of Enhanced and Elemental is partly to justify us having 2 CC breakers, Tremor and Decurse, and probably a third with Grounding Totem on traps, and possibly even a fourth if you include Purging, instant clones, and Presence of Mind. So in my opinion, there are 2 problems with this design. One is that it's all single target stuff besides Tremor Totem. It doesn't help us at all against more than one opponent or with more than one ally. And the second thing is it makes us way too dependent on allies for our survival, and totally helpless if we're on our own or in any kind of lopsided fight, 4 vs 3 for instance or something. Purge, Ascendance, and our anti-CC, when played perfectly, are what have counterbalanced our terrible self-sufficiency and capabilities in every area besides 3 vs 3. But actually, in addition to the 3 negative impacts of 5.1 on DPS shamans that I mentioned earlier, we actually got a 4th nerf in our Purge, because the shields and hots that other heal buffs that hybrids and mages could be putting up are now a lot less effective as well. So it also nerfs us by reducing the effective damage we do with the removal of those buffs through Purge. So given that it's now obvious enhancement shamans and elemental shamans need some fixing to make them viable, what should the changes be? As you probably have guessed, I want our survivability fixed. I want some passive damage reduction, because I agree not all classes should have practical damage immune abilities, but right now we just don't have anything. I think Ascendance and Astral Shift might be, they're pretty crap, but I don't think we necessarily need anything better. But if we don't get anything better, we need to have passive survivability and heals. And I want a healing pack, it's up to the 5.04 levels, or buff of about 40% from where they are now, which, keep in mind, wouldn't still be nearly as strong as the healing in these clips I'm playing, and I'd even be willing to give up Tremor Totem for it. If the self-sufficiency of Enhancement, if it's too good of a thing to also have Tremor Totem breaking fears on healers on top of that, then just remove Tremor Totem or make it only break CCs on the Shaman and his pets. Really, it might not even be a problem because now Tremor Totem's counterable with just blanket silence. That makes it, a skill-based thing. So maybe that alone can justify increasing our survivability. But I'd rather play my own part in keeping myself or allies alive rather than having to try and break my healer out of CC so he can keep me alive. It's just ridiculous. It makes us way over dependent on our allies. But my reasons aren't just preferential playstyle. Boost to self-sufficiency would help make us viable for 1v1, random battlegrounds, and rated battlegrounds. I've only seen one enhancement shaman taken to rated RBG groups above 2k, and that's because he knew people, and that was before 5.1. Like any enhance will just get global all day now, with no chance to do anything. So while I was having a blast at level 85, I had the crazy thought that we might actually be useful in RBGs because of Healing Rain. Because at 85, Healing Rain was a super fun ability because it was actually effective and filled the role of a support ability pretty well, especially for battlegrounds. I don't think I've used Healing Rain a single time in the past 2 months or so, just because now it's not even worth it. So what are the specifics? I want to recap on the specifics. Possibly remove Tremor Totem and make it only work on the Shaman. Or possibly make totems usable while silenced or interrupted again, because no one likes that change anyways. But besides that, enhancement healing needs to be increased, I think by 40%. This also bring Stone Bulwark Totem in line with elementals and resto shields from Stone Bulwark Totem, because for some reason enhancements Stone Bulwark is like only does 3/4 of what Ellie's and restos does. Also make Glyph of Healing Storm also increase the damage of Lightning Bolt and Elemental Blast on player targets by like 10% or 20% per charge. Because right now the opportunity cost of Elemental Blast is way too big in PvP to make the talent, even worth using or considering now with even now with heal so low. Also for the survivability, 15% damage reduction. I was thinking 10% would be enough for a little while, but watching just continuing to watch myself just get annihilated by everything. Pretty much everything. 10% I don't think would be enough. I think 15% would be needed. Maybe if healing was increased by a good amount, 10% might be enough. But we definitely need a really good chunk. Currently, we're just dying to burst while having both Shamanistic Rage and Astral Shift up in the duration of a single CC honor here, like I said before. But I don't really mind that Shamans don't have a near invulnerability damage cooldowns, but we have to have more passive damage reduction otherwise. Besides with all the 26 plus cooldowns we already have to watch already, it'd be really tedious to add 1 or 2 more. But I've known since early this expansion that we needed more damage reduction because we were the only spec that was forced into gemming full resilience to even hope to survive any kind of heavy burst or damage in arenas. So just now it just should be plainly obvious to everyone. A big damage reduction buff will also go a long way in helping us out in rated battlegrounds. That's especially important too, right? Because right now, especially after 5.1, it's a total joke. The moment we step into view of 3 opponents, we're dead. Nothing we could do. It's not just physical damage, maybe even more so spell damage. The idea that we're supposedly some kind of anti-caster class is such a big joke right now because there's no way we can even survive 3 rounds of deep freeze, and most often not even 2, like against the mage, whenever in any kind of situation. So 15% across the board will raise us to the level of Shadow Priest passive reduction. We'll still take about 14% more physical damage than Red Paladins, but less spell passively, though they have some better active cooldowns against spell damage, plus their bubble, plus they have better heals. So I consider this buff more needed and more of a definite thing than the buff to our heals, though I think both are justified. But other than survivability, I think we're alright. There are some other issues I have with the spec, like the still crap design of Capacitor Totem, but they're small compared to our major survivability issue we have now, and some of the things can sort of be accustomed to. Our damage seems alright, but our biggest damage problem is just that we're easily put on the defensive. We're CC'd and kited Ascendants can be locked down, but it's not as easily locked down as elementals. But our offensive capabilities can be improved simply by allowing us more security in actually, going out into melee range when we can hit our opponents and not having to worry about just dying whenever we do that. Similar to how warriors and shadow priests can just go wherever they want to and do whatever they want to most of the time because they have the confidence they can be safe because they have stuff they can fall back on. Because for the most part, people haven't seen warriors stacking resilience because they still don't need to. Because once they do start stacking resilience, like people will really cry that they're just totally unkillable. And Enhance was hardly unkillable while stacking resilience before, and now it's like resilience. It's like it's not even doing anything for us. So yeah, sorry I haven't gone to any proposals for elemental restoration. I don't really know those specs well enough yet to say what they'd need, but I know elemental needs something too because they're going nowhere now. But if you happen to be skeptical, just watching the recordings I've linked in the description. You'll see what I mean by how flimsy we are. So yeah, thanks for listening. That's my wish list for enhancement now. I'll see you guys later.